All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 7th of February, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Karpenter Feature Group meeting. We are a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidance, which basically means please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated. And also, please raise your hand if you'd like to be called. But there's only 3 of us here, so we probably won't stand on ceremony too much. So I had added a couple topics to the agenda for things that I've been looking at. And also, I guess I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion too about kind of where we're at with, creating a new repo and stuff like that. So, yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first one, the orphan machines. So this, following up on what we've been talking about in the last few meetings, I've been trying to do some research using the KubeMark provider to see how easy it is to make the orphan machines. I haven't completed all my investigations here yet, but I am a little concerned because when I looked at some of the code, and I don't know if it shows in this diagram or not, but there's a point at which I think there's a point in here where if it's not a control plane machine, it tries to look to see if there's already a reference that's been set. Yeah, like setting the owner reference, right? And I haven't been able to tell yet if that's if you don't set an owner reference, is that going to cause some of these other controllers to barf and throw the machine back out? So I'm not quite sure how to answer that yet, but that's one of the things that I've been investigating in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if Jeremy or Cameron, if either of you had thoughts about that or questions or comments or anything.
I'm trying to remember because I feel like I also encountered this when I was looking at the machine pool machines implementation had um machines that it created that are basically orphan because they don't point to an infrastructure machine necessarily. Um, but I think they worked around it by I'm trying to remember from the code review. I think they worked around it by assigning the machine pool as the owner or something like that, and then having it get changed later if there was an infrastructure one. So I think they were just making sure that some other resource was the owner reference, not necessarily the correct resource from that diagram you just showed a second ago. But I now want to go look to confirm that.
Yeah, that's a good follow-up point too, and I'll take a look at that as well. That's yeah, I didn't know that. Mainly because I don't know the machine pool stuff super well. But yeah,
Well,
that's
the implementation of the machine pool machines is set up in such a way that if the provider doesn't implement it, it still works. And so that means those machines must exist even if there's no infrastructure machine, which is normally how the owners are set up.
okay, cool. That's good to know. So yeah, so that's, I've been trying to figure that out because I think that'll probably be foundational to what we need to do with if we build a controller that can process a node claim from Carpenter and then generate a machine from it. I think that's probably the first hurdle we'll have to get over. But hopefully it won't be that bad. Um, yeah, I guess we'll see as we get further. So I guess if there's no kind of questions or comments about that, I can move on to the next topic. I realize there's only a couple of us here today, so okay. So the other thing was kind of the repo progress. So at this point, I think I've talked with all the interested parties. I went to SIG Autoscaling, of course, the Cluster API community, the Carpenter community. Nobody's objecting to us wanting this so far. And so I think we're all clear to make the request. It seems like Contribex just needs us to kind of, open a PR and or open an issue and kind of go through that process. But I would like to kind of get a bootstrap in place before we create that repo. just so we have like something to start hacking on. And I'm trying to use my experiments with this orphan machine stuff to kind of get to that point. But I wanted to see, kind of Cameron and Jeremy, what you thought about, is this like kind of an okay path with you two? Like, are you, do you have any objections to kind of this direction?
When you say get a bootstrap in place, can you expand on that a little?
Yeah. So what I would like to do is I would like to have a repo that can build us like a Carpenter binary, and maybe it doesn't do much. Maybe it just we see it like recognizing node claims and node pools or whatever, but that's about it.
Okay.
That's kind of what I was hoping to get to, so that we would have like a jumping off point for people to then say, okay, I see node pools, I see node claims, I'm going to start writing some code to do something now or whatever.
All right. I'm trying to think because I'm just wondering like how easily it would be that I could consume this and set this up in some of our clusters because we're just starting to use Carpenter ourselves, and I know that we're already on a fork of it because we're trying to contribute some changes back.
Oh,
So
gotcha. Okay.
I'm just if we're on a fork of it, how can we make it? Can we set it up in such a way that we can override like the Carpenter binaries and set our own in place? Stuff like that is mainly my first thought.
Yeah. So this would be an entirely separate binary, right? Like we'll be building from our own provider
Okay.
code. So it would, like if you're running with Carpenter AWS today or Carpenter Azure, you would probably have to change a lot to get this, to switch to this. The node pool objects are going to look totally different, for one thing, and the node class objects that we create, those are going to be completely different as well. The node claim, I think the the CRD for that will probably stay the same, but the contents of like node pool and certainly the node classes that we create are going to look a little bit different. So I would imagine this is probably not going to comport well to like switching from one to the other without unless you have your current Carpenter like really confined to a Carpenter namespace and like all the CRDs there, and you could just like blow away that namespace and like bring a new one in. Like, I think it's probably, you're going to have to take that into account if you want to be able to swap the two.
Okay. That's good to know. I can plan for that then.
Cool. Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like if you're thinking about this more from the perspective of like you'd like to consume it and try it out.
Yeah,
Um,
we're basically in the prototyping stage. Like we're testing Carpenter out in like development clusters right now.
okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the kind of results that you're going to see coming directly from AWS or Azure would be like totally different than the results I think you'd see coming out of an early like cluster API alpha. But given what you said, that makes me think that I should lean more towards making sure that the bootstrap we have in place is something that when we start the code, there's actually something you could run in your cluster, like like a Helm chart or some sort of manifest, so that like a user could just come to the repo and consume it if they want to try to start operating it, even though it may not do anything necessarily to begin with.
That would definitely make it easier and maybe make it easier for other people in the community to test it out too. And you don't necessarily need to do all that work. Like, can scope it out and split the tasks up.
Yeah, for sure. I think like maybe what I'll try to do is maybe before the next week, I'll try to put together a plan for how like I think we can approach this and like get the repo in place and then start working towards that kind of first, milestone we want to get to. Okay. I don't know, Jeremy, did you have any thoughts or did you want to add anything?
No, that sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. So I mean that was mainly the agenda that I wanted to get through. Like I said, we're kind of in the midway into like getting the repo in place and kind of getting to the next steps of this. But I've still been doing a little bit of early research just to try and become comfortable with that. And yeah, so I think we'll just keep going this way, and maybe, probably not before the next meeting, but maybe within a month we could have a repo in place so we could start like kind of hacking and trying things out there.
Okay, that sounds good. I mean, that works with the timeline that we're working on. So
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling like that one of the big things I'm concerned about, especially like, thinking about a situation like yours, Cameron, is where one of the things that's going to be missing from the cluster API version to begin with, that I think we'll probably have to think about long term, is the pricing information, right? And like, I know that Karpenter is like, can be really good about examining pricing information in the inventory and like picking things out that make good sense. And so I think that long term, we're going to need to have a cluster API enhancement that talks about providers being able to opt in to providing this kind of like pricing data in a similar way that we've done with the scale from zero information. Because this is going to be where, like, if we want providers to fully integrate well with like Cluster Autoscaler and Karpenter, being able to have that pricing information as well will mean we can turn on other features. And I think that's where it's going to start to get like probably a lot more competitive, like in a situation like yours, Cameron, where you say like, okay, we're using Karpenter AWS today. And now if we want to switch to Karpenter Cluster API, we don't want to do that and then have our costs like shoot back up, right? Like that makes no sense. That's right. So like the costs have to at least be close or competitive or something, for this even to make sense, right? Like, so I think that's probably something we'll have to talk about with the main group and everything, but certainly we don't need that for the first version of this.
yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, cost is a major component of why we're exploring Karpenter.
Yeah, totally. And this is like, this is a big concern inside Red Hat too. We've been doing some testing recently to kind of like look at the, the cost differences between like operating Karpenter, operating Cluster Autoscaler, and there's like, it's a deep topic, right? And so I think when people are considering, switching their infrastructure from one to the other, it's like, well, there's a lot of details to take in there. And I think anything we can do to make the cluster API side as competitive as possible with the native versions, I think that's just going to make this better, for the community. So I don't know. I'm kind of optimistic about that, I guess. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, why don't we like take 15 minutes of our day back here and, get back to doing other stuff, I guess.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, cool. Thanks for coming out, Jeremy and Cameron.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.